Good evening to all of you, and welcome to our talk today as part of the Sust-En series of Pune Knowledge Cluster. I'm Dr. Priya Nagraj, and I'm the CEO of Pune Knowledge Cluster. So we're very happy to host Santosh Gurunath today, who is the founder and the CEO of Umagine Hydrogen Private Limited. He will be talking to us about green hydrogen for India, prospects and impending challenges, where we will explore green hydrogen's role in the global decarbonization, emphasizing its rapid global rise backed by significant investments, including investments that you're seeing both from the government and the private sector in India. We will talk about the critical challenges from establishing eco-credentials to commercials and application specificity, and also setting the stage for this very nascent industry's impactful journey ahead. Santosh comes with very credible credentials in this space. He has very diverse experience in working with various sectors in the energy space, as including consulting organizations like Shell, BCG, and also an entrepreneur himself. He's executed several projects in the solar energy, EV, hydrogen space, primarily in Netherlands as well as in India. Since 2021, Umagine is based out of India and is dedicated to propelling the low-carbon energy hydrogen economy through comprehensive advisory roles across policy, strategy, engineering, technology, aspiring to significantly shape the global hydrogen ecosystem. We look forward to Santosh's views, insights on where he sees the hydrogen economy today, both in terms of technology as well as commercial feasibility. Just to give you a sense of the series under which we are doing this talk, Pune Knowledge Cluster is an organization established by the Office of the PSA. We are based in Pune, and we are a knowledge management and enabling organization. We work with over 80 partner organizations in various sectors in health, environment, mobility, big data, AI, and capacity building to build large science and technology projects which have social relevance. And as part of the Sust-En series, we focus on sustainable and environmental initiatives which make Pune resilient in terms of food, water, and livelihood. Energy is a very big part of the work that we do in this space. And we host several experts to conduct workshops, programs, and talks as part of this series who talk about various challenges in the policy space, technology space, innovation space, when it comes to implementing programs in the sustainability and environment space. With that, I will hand over the stage to Santosh. Santosh, all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Priya, for the kind introduction. And thanks a lot, PKC team, for organizing this. It's a pleasure to be presenting about this topic in front of you. What I'll be talking about, and as Priya already said, is about hydrogen economy, right? So I have like, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 odd slides talking about a number of aspects where we start with very much on the why part, right? We answer the why question on where hydrogen is, to what is being done to kind of propel it further, right? What are the key value drivers and what is being done from a policy perspective. Then we talk about some specific challenges, right? Both around the technical as well as the commercial use cases as business cases around hydrogen, right? So that's basically the structure, right? I would be happy to also have, let's say, towards the end of the talk, an interactive session. So we try to keep the discussion short, so that we have like at least 10 to 15 minutes left towards the end of it for a discussion or for an interactive session. Happy to do that. So with that, let me get started directly. First of all, why hydrogen? And for those who don't know, hydrogen is also been termed specifically as Bill Gates basically termed this as Swiss Army knife for decarbonization. And you might imagine why Bill Gates. Actually, Bill Gates runs a very large investment firm by the name Breakthrough Energy Ventures, and they invest very heavily in decarbonization initiatives and specifically hydrogen, right? So hydrogen is very much termed as Swiss Army knife of decarbonization, or decarbonization of so-called hard to abate sectors, right? So these are sectors where let's say conventional electrification or direct electrification is a challenge. That's where, let's say, green hydrogen kind of comes into play, and we'll talk about it, right? So what is hydrogen right now? What are we talking about? So hydrogen is not at all new, right? Very I want to make it very clear. Hydrogen is not at all. It's been actually around for more than 100 odd years in different forms and shapes, right? So it's being used currently. I'd say from Indian perspective, you see about 6.5 million tons per annum being used, and from a global perspective, it's close to 90 million tons per annum. So this is the current hydrogen demand, right? So that is where hydrogen is used currently, out of which I'd say both in India and globally, 95, 98% gets used in refinery and ammonia applications. So basically within refinery, again, hydrogen gets used for a process called hydrocracking, through which you make more diesel, or it gets used for desulfurization perspective, right? So you might have heard about, of course, BIS 5, BIS 6, Euro 5, Euro 6, like all kind of standards. And a lot of that has to also do with sulfur. So you remove sulfur using hydrogen. So refinery is one big application for hydrogen, right? The second biggest application is ammonia, and ammonia is like as an intermediate or a primary chemical for a number of different applications, a number of different use cases, majorly used for fertilizers and chemicals. And within the fertilizer space, majorly used for the production of urea, right? Urea is one of the most important fertilizers from an agriculture perspective. So ammonia is the second biggest kind of part of it, right? So this is the ratio, and then there are some minor applications. Methanol is produced and that's again an intermediate or a primary chemical for a number of let's say further let's say chemical use cases. And then there are a number of small applications. I mean, in fact, let's say for space applications, hydrogen gets used. You have steel industry, even for coal thermal power plants, hydrogen gets used for research and development purposes, agrochemicals, pharmaceuticals. There's a range of smaller applications where the final, 2 to 3% or 5% of hydrogen gets utilized, right? So the trend is very much similar here as well as globally, right? I mean, if you look at it. And to kind of stress it further, the hydrogen, what is used over here is primarily produced by fossil fuels, right? So it's I would say 70 to 80% of that is produced using natural gas, and then the rest is produced using coal, right? And let's say in the process of that, you of course have a lot of emissions, right? So that is of course one of the major use cases or major reasons to look at so-called green hydrogen, which I'll talk about, where you produce less or no carbon emissions, right? But this is a current application set of your green hydrogen, or I wouldn't say green hydrogen, but hydrogen, right? Now, moving on to the next slide, this is basically an exhaustive kind of list of the use cases. So we are talking about all the use cases where hydrogen makes sense, right? So there are definitely several use cases where hydrogen is, I would say, not the best choice, not the first choice. But what I mentioned over here is primarily the use cases where hydrogen is the best solution from a decarbonization perspective, right? So these are definitely the green blocks, right? These are the ones which we already talked about, existing use cases of hydrogen around refineries, ammonia, and methanol production, where you could move from the current fossil-based carbon dioxide intensive production of hydrogen to a different form of hydrogen production, which is green hydrogen, right? Which we will cover. Then there are a number of use cases in the industrial space, right? So these are in the industrial space, hydrogen could be used either as a feedstock or as a heating medium, right? So when we say feedstock, this is specifically industries like steel. So currently in steel, you use, let's say, coke as a reducing medium of your iron ore, and that reducing, let's say, medium could be shifted to hydrogen. So a process called hydrogen direct reduction and could be deployed to make green steel, right? So which will make a steel industry very, let's say, carbon free or less carbon intensive. Similarly, there are a number of other industries where you need very high grade heat, right? So for low grade heat, which is less than 400, 500, maybe even 600 degrees Celsius, electrification could be a good option, right? It's still a good option. But whenever you go beyond, let's say 800, 1000 degrees Celsius, then you are very much dependent on energy rich, energy dense fuels, right? Which has been traditionally natural gas or coal or any other form of, let's say, hydrocarbons. So that is something which we could very much move towards hydrogen, right? So hydrogen could be used for those fuels. So these are like cement industry, glass, aluminum, steam production in like large scale, high pressure steam in boilers. So a number of these industries where hydrogen will play a very important role from a decarbonization perspective. Now, in addition to that, there are certain industries, for example, from an energy storage perspective, right? Like you're looking at renewable energy mix in the grid increasing with time. So as and when it goes up, so the intermittency becomes more and more a problem from both a grid balancing, grid stability perspective, and you need say timely power perspective, right? Or firm power. So so solar and wind are not firm power, but they're infirm power. So for that, energy storage is very important. So when we talk about short duration energy storage, a couple of, let's say, a few minutes to a couple of hours or 1 hour, a battery energy storage or pumped hydro kind of solutions are very interesting, right? I mean, they make more sense. But then very quickly you come to a scenario, depending upon your geography, for long duration energy storage, 4, 6, 8 hours, even days, even weeks of energy storage, right? Like seasonal energy storage, if you kind of extend it in a future scenario, right? So there, hydrogen is actually one of the only solutions which is available from a long-term energy storage, which is a power-to-power application, right? But then there are a number of mobility applications, right? So not again, not let's say light mobility or micro mobility is suitable for hydrogen. That's not something which is interesting. Also from an overall perspective, but then uh, whenever you talk about heavy mobility and beyond, right? Trucks, long duration buses, let's say marine applications. So all these applications, hydrogen will play an important role, right? Where hydrogen could be used as hydrogen or some derivatives of hydrogen. It could be ammonia, it could be even synthetic aviation fuel, synthetic fuels, right? Where you combine hydrogen and carbon dioxide to make synthetic fuels. So those could be used in certain applications like aviation, for example. One of very interesting application, although small at this stage, is hydrogen is also an exciting, let's say, let's say vector for drones, right? I mean, because it provides for that long duration endurance kind of application. So we see hydrogen playing an important role specifically for long duration and endurance related drones. So in nutshell, like these are, let's say, the major set of applications where hydrogen will play a role. I mean, there might be, of course, there are always discussions around let's say, it's hydrogen is one of the most talked about elements in terms of use cases where it should not be applied or where it should be applied, right? But we do believe that in all these cases, for sure, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, and there are very few alternatives other than hydrogen for these, right? What you what you saw here, right? I mean, the numbers which you saw here, like 6.5 and 90. I mean, they're expected to kind of grow significantly over the next, let's say, few decades, right? This 90 is expected to become 200 in 2030 and 500 by 2050 in terms of million tons per annum. And in terms of India, this 6.5 is expected to become at least, let's say, 15, at least 10 to 12 by 2030 and 25 by 2050, right? So there is a lot happening in terms of these numbers and these use cases becoming important. So in nutshell, if there is one thing which you take away from hydrogen use cases, is that hard to abate sectors, right? And if we do not solve for the hard to abate sectors, we are never going to achieve our net zero ambitions and our 1.5-degree targets, right? So hydrogen plays a critical role in that ecosystem, right? So that is one of the key takeaways when it comes to, let's say, use cases, right? So from there, kind of segueing into policies, right? I mean, in order to support hydrogen development, a lot of policy imperatives and incentives are necessary, right? I mean, that applies to any new technology which comes in because they are expensive. Infrastructure is a challenge, and also nobody understands why should we move away from status quo, right? So policy has to kind of play that important role, right? Uh, so there are like specifically talking about India, might be knowing about it. India announced its, let's say, intention to launch the National Green Hydrogen Mission back in August 2021, and subsequently over the last 2 years, a number of let's say granularities around the mission has come up, right? So on the right hand side, which you see the big announcement which came earlier this year, total around 20,000 crores has been dedicatedly reserved for the mission. And the idea of this is 20,000 crores is to result or have a target of close to 5 million tons of green hydrogen production by 2030. Now, this is the first time I'm using the word green hydrogen. I've talked about it, but green hydrogen. So what is green hydrogen? Is nothing but, I say it comes up in the technology, but where you use, let's say, different methods of producing hydrogen by which the carbon dioxide or the carbon intensity is much less than the fossil fuels, right? So that's a very generic kind of term, but there within that there are a number of different methods, right? There's through water, there's through biomass, and I'll cover, I think, on that electrolysis a bit later on the technology side. But what is important to kind of mention over here is that this 20,000 crore is being reserved of a lot for the so-called site program, right? And that site program has two elements mainly. One is giving subsidies on a for the hydrogen developers, right, in order to kind of make their business cases viable, and giving subsidies to set up electrolyzer manufacturing facilities in India, right? So there are like both on the equipment side as well as on the production facility side. So that is like a big part. And then there are some minor elements around pilot projects to kind of kickstart, on the steel side, on the maritime side, in the certain industries where, let's say, these pilot projects are going to be important. And finally, a small part is also reserved towards R&D, which funds will be distributed to kind of start developing indigenous and low-cost technologies specifically for India, right? So that's the big tailwind which we have around green hydrogen. Now, there's one more very important element over here, right? And I think I didn't mention it before, but it's important to mention this slide. Why is India so bullish on hydrogen, right? And the reason for that is way beyond decarbonization. The reason for that has to do with energy independence, right? Green hydrogen could be India's ticket towards energy security and energy independence. And why I say that is, in in one way or the other, green hydrogen can replace a lot of fossil fuels, and India imports significant amount of natural gas, significant amount of oil, crude oil. So kind of moving towards green hydrogen can make India very much energy independence, and potentially the ambition of the Honorable Prime Minister is to become an energy exporter even, right? Producing green hydrogen. And India does have a big advantage in production of green hydrogen, which we'll cover in the technology section a little bit. But that's the, let's say, the higher goal, right? I mean, beyond decarbonization, energy, let's say independence is the higher goal, which India is kind of looking at and exploring, right? Now, of course, I mean, this is not restricted to India. I mean, a lot of policies, even more exciting and more better incentivized policies are launched globally. If you add up all those policies together, right, the US, EU, UK, Japan, Australia, Canada, India, I mean, you're talking about $300 billion of subsidies alone, right? Just imagine, just $300 billion of subsidies has been allocated to kickstart this hydrogen economy, and that's how serious the entire world is on this, right? And that also makes it very interesting. It's one of the very few energy vectors where the entire world is working at the same time, right? It's a concerted effort, and that's why it's also so critical to kind of work towards it. Now, and different incentives have different, let's say, forms and shape. For example, in the US, there are forms of tax credits. In the EU, it's in form of carbon credits for difference. So that's basically, let's say, if you're going to save let's say, if there's a difference in terms of carbon intensity which you're going to produce or save, or there's a cost difference, then that's being kind of looked at. And specifically, EU is a very interesting market, right? So EU has a target of close to 20 million metric tons per annum by 2030, right? That's their internal demand, what they are foreseeing. But only 10 million they are expecting that they could produce in Europe, right? Of course, I mean, Europe is, in terms of land availability, except for the south of Europe and a bit of east of Europe, there isn't much of, I mean, land, or I wouldn't say there is land, but then not conducive land enough to produce green hydrogen. So about 50% of that is going to be imported, right? And that is the opportunity which India is looking at, right? So there have been announcements, and it's very clear that out of the 5 million metric tons which India aims to produce, 60 to 70% they are expecting to export to EU predominantly, but also to some of the South Asian countries in Japan and South Korea, right? And that's going to be a very interesting play if you look at it, right? So overall, quite a lot of tailwinds globally moving towards it. So it's all, so far tick, right? Before I get to the challenges. Um, and now if you kind of, look at it from what's really happening over here in India, uh, broadly speaking, right? I mean, the Indian green hydrogen ecosystem so far is kind of divided into three players, right? Broadly, three categories. The first category is your Reliance and Adani, right? Very clearly, they are looking at this very seriously. Both together have announced over $120 billion, and in fact, if you read through, both together have announced more than 5 million metric tons of capacity addition by 2030, right? So they are very bullish at it, and they are looking at this as their ticket towards being amongst the bigger energy players on a global scale, right? So that is Reliance and Adani as one bucket, who are looking at the entire ecosystem. The second bucket is your renewable energy developers, right? So these are the likes of Greenco's, the Acmes, the Renews, and the O2s, and all those typical traditional solar wind developers who are looking at this as a forward integration play, right? And they want to capitalize on their expertise and their, let's say, know-how, right, on building their renewable energy assets. And when it comes to green hydrogen, let's say 70% of your cost is renewable energy, right? So if that is the case, then where does it come from, right? So they are basically looking at it as a forward integration play and very active into it. So that is the second biggest category of players. The third category is the PSUs, right? So these are uh, the NTPCs, IOCLs. So all these players, some of them already have a hydrogen exposure, like the refineries of IOCL, BPCL, HPCL, but there are several like NTPC, GAIL, ONGC. So all of these PSUs have been given some kind of a soft mandate from the government. There's no hard mandate yet, but a soft mandate that everybody has to look at it. So all of them are looking and exploring pilot projects, right? So as we speak, there are several pilot projects which are being taking place. Specifically, NTPC is playing a lead role in this. In fact, IOCL as well, HPCL as well, LNT has been, making plans for both, electrolyzer manufacturing. Jackson is doing some EPC projects. Acme has already done a pilot plant. So all of them are kind of leading this movement in India from the front, and everybody is looking for, let's say, the bigger opportunity of expanding and also from an export oriented play, right? And one specific, observation again, right? This is just our observation about NTPC. NTPC is looking at hydrogen in a very strategic way, right? Just think about NTPC. They're the biggest thermal power plant. Say they have the largest thermal portfolio in India. So what happens in thermal? Of course, you produce a lot of CO2. So that CO2 is an asset, right? If you look at it as an asset instead of a liability, you can produce a lot of green hydrogen. Combine that hydrogen with the CO2, you capture that CO2, and through the hydrogen and CO2, you can create the entire value chain of chemicals, right? It could be synthetic aviation fuels, it could be methanol, it could be also going into plastics, the entire, let's say, downstream refine industry in terms of refineries and chemicals that could be done just through hydrogen and CO2 and using, let's say, the Fischer Tropsch and other kind of reactions, right? So NTPC is looking at it that way. In fact, Adani as well, right? I mean, they also have some thermal portfolio, and they're also looking at it from a fertilizer play as well, potentially. So a lot is happening in this sector, and I mean, it's very bubbling and very active, I would say. And in fact, I mean, one insight to share as well is a lot of this got kicked in somewhere around. A lot of this got I would say, nitro boost to some extent somewhere around last year, end of last year, when the natural gas prices were through the roof due to the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and then, let's say, German traders, Uniper came over to India looking out for green hydrogen supply, right? Because at that time, on paper, green hydrogen was cheaper than, let's say, gray hydrogen, and everybody started to rush towards it. Of course, the prices have gone down a little bit since then. So, but then the enthusiasm has not damped uh, uh, at all, right? So that's like, where India is, what are the policy imperatives, and how is India looking at it, right? And all these different players have different kind of orientations or reason to look at, right? Now, coming a bit to the technology challenges, and I think I mentioned this a couple of times before. What exactly is green hydrogen? I mean, green hydrogen can be produced broadly two ways, but from a large scale perspective, we predominantly talk about electrolyzer. So electrolysis is basically kind of an electrochemical reaction, right? Where you split your water molecule H2O into hydrogen and oxygen, to H2 and O2, right? And in order to do so, you provide electricity. When that electricity is derived from renewable energy sources like solar and wind, then it is called green hydrogen, right? So the exact definition, the devil is in the details, right? I mean, it's, in terms of how that definition is kind of derived. But in India, they have looked at the MNRE has announced that the definition is less than 2 kg CO2 per kg of hydrogen, right? Whereas, let's say, gray hydrogen has a carbon intensity of close to 11 kg CO2 per kg of hydrogen. So, significant reduction from that basis, right? So, that is a primary way in which green hydrogen is produced. Then the other way is through biomass, right? So you could also convert biomass into hydrogen through different processes. It could be through a gasification process or through, let's say, the biogas and reforming process. So there are a number of ways in which you can convert that also into, let's say, hydrogen. And that is something which we are expecting to see quite a bit in India, specifically in a distributed way. For distributed hydrogen production, bio to hydrogen can be very much interesting because that's carbon neutral, because it's a specifically if you choose the source of biomass, right? That's the most important thing. Then let's say it's the CO2 which has been embodied. That's what you are kind of releasing back, right? So it's kind of carbon neutral in that sense. So that's how green hydrogen is doing. So far so good. Now I'll start talking about some of the challenges, right? Technically or technologically, there are a number of challenges when it comes to green hydrogen. Now, the first and the major one is that let's just give you some math, right? To produce about 5 million metric tons, which is the Indian target, you need about 50 gigawatt of electrolyzers, right? So for 1 million metric tons, it's 10 gigawatt of electrolyzers. Now, let's say the current technology where it is, say the largest electrolyzer, a single unit electrolyzer which has been installed is not more than 5 megawatt, right? 5 megawatt. So you're not going to, achieve much by installing thousands of 5 megawatt unit, right? To get to that 10 gigawatt. So a lot of scaling up has to happen. Even this 5 megawatt has been installed 2 years back or something like 20 megawatt system. And there are a number of systems which are coming up, right? Specifically in China, specifically in Europe, 200 megawatt systems, 500 megawatt systems, which are getting installed, but all of them are just starting up. So there is no operational and manufacturing experience. And specifically in India, there is no manufacturing experience at all, right? I mean, there are companies who are starting to build that up, but that ecosystem is still very nascent and very fresh. So that is one challenge for sure, right? So we're talking about all this mega billion-dollar industry on basis of something which we have tested just in our kitchens, right? I mean, so technology is mature for sure, but then are we able to achieve that scale that quickly? Question mark, right? The second issue is around renewable energy. Now, renewable energy is intermittent, right? I mean, you don't know when a cloud cover comes up and you don't know when the wind stops blowing, right? I mean, it's very difficult to predict as well. So, completely relying on renewable energy sources is going to be a challenge for your electrolyzer, right? So, how would your electrolyzer actually work? I mean, if you have to install energy storage in between, then it becomes very expensive again, right? So that is one big challenge. And then, of course, in India, for example, people are looking at using the grid. Yeah, fine. I mean, you can use the grid, but the carbon intensity of the grid is like 810 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. I mean, so the if you are producing like hydrogen, even if you are using 10% grid, right? So you are producing hydrogen of 5 kg CO2 per kg hydrogen. Just 10% of grid will result in such a high carbon intensity. So you don't have a lot of room there as well, right? So that is one big challenge which needs to be addressed. Can the electrolyzer deal with such kind of intermittency? Are we producing really green hydrogen, or is it like grid supported? So we really don't know. Right? I talked about manufacturing in terms of ecosystem, in terms of stacks, in terms of electrolyzers, but also it's not only the electrolyzer, right? It's also the entire system around it. I mean, you need to kind of store your hydrogen. You need to transport your hydrogen somewhere. There are hydrogen pipelines, and let's say in the hydrogen plant itself, there are other equipment as well. So all these things, all these ecosystem is something which is completely non-existent in India right now. And fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not sure what word to use. China has moved very fast on this, right? Chinese government has been shelling out hundreds of millions of dollars in setting up gigafactories of all these systems, right? Um, and honestly, we are lagging behind significantly. So there is a risk of this becoming another solar or another battery 2 3 years down the line, and that is something which we really should avoid, right? The whole point of energy independence kind of gets lost if you are then again dependent on other sources for your core raw materials. So this is a big opportunity as well, where we should, or let's say the industry or companies or entrepreneurs should jump onto, right? And take advantage of the white space which exists today, right? Uh, then coming to the part on the business case, green hydrogen is one of the let's say few technologies, right, where there is so much of talk, so much of let's say number crunching and everything. But then if you look at it, there's no business case today. I mean, there is no business case except for one or two use cases. It is very difficult to justify a green hydrogen facility for any application without losing money, right? Which is quite, which is okay, which is normal for a new technology. But then, business case has to happen, right? And that's why some of those subsidies, some of those incentives we talked about are very important, right? So this is like, let's say this slightly older kind of infographic, but then mm, there have been this $240 billion of projects announced. It's currently more than 350, and out of which only about 10% has reached final investment decision, right? Which is a fairly a small number. And that's not going to be sufficient to reach our targets. What needs to. This is globally, right? It's not only. This is not specific to India. It's a global number. So there is no commercial business case, as I said, without government support, right? And that government support in terms of incentives has to be rolled out fast, has to be rolled out efficiently and transparently, right? So that it's a fair play for everyone. So that is number one, it is very important. Second, most of the hydrogen use cases, which I already said earlier, are all large scale, right? Refineries, ammonia, and some mega plants. But then there is no small scale demand currently. So this demand has to be created, right? The mobility part, the smaller industries part. So that demand also has to be created. Now, the third part when it comes to economics, right? You remember I talked about Russia-Ukraine crisis and natural gas prices. So most of the applications, the hydrogen use case is directly dependent on your natural gas hydrogen price differential, right? So if the natural gas price is low, hydrogen does not have a use case, does not have a business case, and if it's high, then it has a business case. So and it's nobody can predict natural gas prices. It's quite dynamic and have been more dynamic than oil recently. So and it's also very heavily dependent on geopolitics, right? So there is also that element which needs to be kind of looked at. And all in all, there's a chicken and egg problem, right? Whether the high supply will come, whether the demand will come, or whether the supply chain infrastructure will come. So everyone, each and every player is looking at it, looking at each other to ask, can you please build that first, right? And that's not, according to us, that's not the way to go. There's no way in such a big ecosystem and economy can be created. So has to be an integrated play. We have to come together, use the best subsidies which are available, and really, look at it from a energy independence and decarbonization perspective, and really go for it, right? And not really and look at how you solve for that business case rather than asking if there's a business case, then give us a call, right? I think that approach has to. We think that approach should shift, and that's the only way that this can kind of fly, right? So from there, I'll spend time on this, and I think this is one of my last slides. It also takes a bit of time to kind of explain this, and then we'll completely open for question and answers after that. So when you're talking about green hydrogen production using electrolysis, right? So that is splitting of water. The current levelized cost of hydrogen, or when we say LCOH, it includes, when we say levelized cost of hydrogen, or LCOH, as you see it here, it includes the entire element, right? It includes the capex, opex, O&M, life cycle replacement cost, everything. So currently, it depends a little bit on the geography, but then you're looking at about $4 to $5 per kg, right? And out of that, as I said, 60% of the cost is your electricity cost, or renewable energy electricity cost is 60%. Your capex is the second major element. Then there are interest components, O&M components, and other components which adds up. Now, for those who are familiar with the hydrogen industry, there is a number $1 per kg which kind of gets floated around, and that's very ambitious. I mean, we really wish that would happen, but then we try to kind of do a benchmark or breakdown of what really needs to happen in order to get to that $1, and it's like a number of different things. First of all, the electrolyzer efficiency has to go up. Right? That's the biggest value driver. Once that goes up, from 60 to 90%, for instance, you need much lesser electricity to produce the same amount of hydrogen. So a lot of technology innovation has to happen over here, right? So that's one. The second thing is your cost of renewables. I mean, at 3 rupees or 4 rupees per unit, this is not going to cut the mark. And of course, you can ask me, right? I mean, but Bison, I mean, we are talking about 2.2, 2.3 rupees PPAs, but that's solar at a 24%, 25% CUF, right? I mean, that's not going to cut the mark for electrolyzer. You need, let's say, higher CUFs. You need a hybrid solar wind scenario. You need transmission. You might need some storage. So all put together, I mean, four maybe a bit higher side, but you wouldn't get more than three, 3.5 today, right? So that has to go down to 1.5. So both of this together will have the biggest kind of almost a 50% impact or a 50% decrease when it comes to the cost of, let's say, levelized cost of hydrogen. The next biggest element will be your capex, right? And that is something which is more straightforward. I mean, we expect that will happen. Currently, the total installed cost of electrolyzers would be close to about 7 crores per megawatt. Now, again, depends a bit. I mean, you could get 4 crores from China as well, or you could get 12 crores from US or Europe as well. So this is more a median number, I would say. And realistically, we can do 7 crore per megawatt, and that also will come down. So this is something which I'm least worried about, because as and when the scale comes up and the entire ecosystem is being set up, the electrolyzer cost will come down for sure, right? Then the current lifetime of your stack is about 10 years. I mean, of course, that could go up to 30 years. Minor impact, but still an impact, right? And similarly, on the O&M expenditure, with time, these plants will become more and more autonomous. The required people will be less, and let's say also your changes, catalyst changes, all those things can be improved. So that also has a reasonable impact on your levelized cost plan. But even after all this, right, you add up all these four things. I mean, you achieved everything. You're still reaching 1.5, maybe $1.2 per kg, not less than that, right? So still to get to less than one, you need beyond this some amount of carbon tax or carbon credits, right? So the overall, I mean, this is of course ambition, and we also really wish that it would happen in this direction. But overall, I would say there's a lot of challenges to kind of look at. So kind of summarizing to some extent, I mean, from the technology side, from the business side, from the commercial side, from the scaling up side, there are a number of these, let's say, kind of opportunities, I would call it, to kind of work on, right? As companies, as individuals, to kind of achieve what we want to achieve from a decarbonization kind of perspective. So with that, I mean, I would like to wrap up and open up for any questions, and I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you so much, Dr. Santosh. It is really informative talk. So there are two questions in the chat box. I think Dr. Ajit, just a minute. I think somebody has raised the hand. I just unmute them and they can ask
Sure.
question directly. Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Ajit, can you unmute?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation, and got really good insights. And I follow you in LinkedIn also. Your honest reviews are, I really appreciate your honest reviews. Well, coming back for my question is with respect to this hydrogen storage for mobility application. So Mirai has 700 bar. So where are we heading? I mean, with respect to requirement of this kind of 700 bar hydrogen storage for mobility application, either for trucks or car, type 4, basically type 4 or type 5. What is your thought on that?
Right. So First of all, thank you very much for your kind words. So when you're looking at the mobility application, right? So Mirai has 700 bar. Currently in India, the regulations do not allow you to go beyond, I think, 450 or 500 bar. So
Oh.
that is a current kind of limitation which is in India, but we are trying, or let's say the industry is trying to kind of get that out, right? PESO regulations to 700 bar. So we definitely believe that when it comes to hydrogen trucks, hydrogen buses, both 350 bar and 700 bar cylinders will be required. So these are both type 3, type 4, not type 5. I mean, that's very much, I would say, space applications, but type 3, type 4 cylinders will definitely be required in a very, in a very big way, right? I mean, you've seen, for example, Reliance already has made it very clear that they are going to switch their entire fleet to hydrogen. And Ashok Leyland has been building trucks on that. Eicher has been building trucks. Tata Motors has been building buses and trucks. So a lot of activities has already kind of kick-started and taken place. So moving very fast. And currently there is no, I think there are one or two companies just building these type 4 cylinders in a very small scale, more like for experimental purposes. But overall, that ecosystem does not exist in India. And also, of course, you are dependent on carbon fiber as well, which is another challenge. So overall, the demand is definitely going to grow significantly for automotive application, given India's kind of positioning across these major conglomerates for both type 3, type 4 cylinders, which might start with, I would say, 350 bar in the short term till that 700 bar problem gets solved from a regulatory perspective, and then kind of, move on to 700 bar kind of pressure, let's say pressure levels.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
There is a question by, I think, Carol. Carol, can you please unmute yourself?
Hi, this is Carol from Agric High-Tech. Thank you for your wonderful presentation, Mr. Santosh. I would like to understand what are the status of the hydrogen valleys in India. And quite recently, I understood that Chennai Hydrogen Valley has been picked up. And I would like to understand the status for Pune Hydrogen Valley. I tried to get some information from the internet, but I haven't found any information that it has fully uh, kicked off yet, as well as the other hydrogen valley programs in India.
Sure. So let me answer it, and I think Priya, feel free to kind of add on to my answer as well. So there are like two parts of the hydrogen valley, right? One is the hydrogen valleys being kickstarted by private companies, right? Which is a completely different initiative. So this is happening in Kerala. This is happening also in Gujarat and other regions as well, right? So they are looking at different hydrogen valleys. But the bigger scheme is that is the DST program which they had announced, let's say, a few months back, right? So for Hydrogen Valley Innovation Clusters, HVIC specifically, where DST was looking to fund up to say 15 to 30 crores per valley for these programs. And a number of these valleys are, let's say, this program or this tender is in progress. So of course we cannot share much on what's exactly happening and when what is getting filled. But let's say a number of different, let's say, valleys or HVICs have been shortlisted, right? With Pune, of course, being one of them, which was announced, I think, recently, being one of them which has been shortlisted. And number of these valleys are participating as part of the second round of the tender. And then I think, let's say, maybe in another few couple of months, it will be announced who won those tenders. So that is that. And that is the status on that specifically. But there is also, for example, IEH2A announced a valley in Kochi, looking at both the, let's say, port side and BPCL Kochi. And then there's also something in Gujarat which has been announced. So a lot of different kind of initiatives has been kind of happening in different parts of the country specifically. But Pune, this is the current status that it's under tender process. Yeah.
There is a question by Dr. Tushar. Can you unmute yourself, Dr. Tushar?
Yeah. Hello, Dr. Santosh. I am Dr. Tushar from Agarkar Research Institute. So my question is, what is your view on biohydrogen production by microbial process, and what is the economics related to it?
Right. So thanks a lot, Dr. Tushar. First of all, I'm not doctor, I'm just Mr. Santosh. So just
Yeah.
making it clear. So So see, I mean, honestly, I'm not, let's say, very much aware of the economics around it specifically. But then what we are seeing is that, let's say, specifically around hydrogen production using microbes, right? Like different kind of algae, microalgae from wastewater, for example. Let's say, and also, so these are different, of course, also electrochemical processes and some electrochemical thermal electrochemical processes. So a lot of work is being done, and there are some fairly let's say well-funded startups in the US and Europe who have scaled it up beyond demonstration phase as well. So there is quite a bit of work happening over there. But in India, if you look at it from a policy perspective, it is not very covered much in detail. I mean, it's primarily biomass gasification or green hydrogen from electrolysis process. But honestly, we do think that there is quite a bit of potential over here. But it's still, I would say, in TRL 2, 3, maybe 4 level, not yet reached on the commercial scale. But the potential is definitely there. I'm sorry, I cannot talk about the economics because we have not looked at it in detail.
Yeah. So I will just add up to the same topic. Actually, we are working on dark fermentation hydrogen production, and we are trying to demonstrate it on a large scale. So actually, I'm a biologist, so I don't think about economical perspective much when I do research. So that is why I was more keen to understand the economics and all those things. Thank you, Santosh.
Sure.
Yeah.
There is a question by Arvin. Can you unmute yourself, Arvin? Can you hear me, Arvin?
Yeah, am I audible to you, ma'am?
Yes.
Sir, my question is regarding the thin film technology, especially the thin film technology available for the overall water splitting. So I need to know what are the current progress and trend in the same. So actually, I'm currently doing my research in physics, basically in material
Right. So,
physics. So I want to know what are the current trends and progress in the same.
got it. Thanks. Thanks for your question, Aravind. I mean, honestly, on the current major electrolysis, major techniques which is used for hydrogen production around water electrolysis, they are not really thin film technologies. I mean, there, of course, you use some amount of membranes or some amount of, let's say, I would say combination of membrane electrode assembly or some amount of diaphragms. But these are fairly standard, which are used in the electrolysis process, right? So in there, I would say things are kind of, from the alkaline electrolysis, it's more or less mature. I mean, commercially mature as well. When it comes to PEM technology, there is still some work happening around, how to optimize your membrane, what kind of loading you need to put on your platinum, iridium, etc. But that's on the electrolysis. But if you're referring to something else, specifically on the thin film part, I mean, maybe I'm not getting that question, but I'm not aware of that specifically. But this is what is happening on the electrolysis, diaphragm, membrane side.
I think there are no other questions in the chat box. Just a minute. Yes, I think it is answered, Mr. Santosh. Yeah. So thank you so much for this wonderful talk. And just for the participant, there are a few instructions. So we have shared a feedback form link in the chat box. Please feel free to send your feedback. And also the recording of this talk will be available on our YouTube channel. The link is also shared in the chat box. So thank you so much. Please stay tuned for upcoming events and please visit our social media handles. Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Santosh. Thanks a lot for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you.
very
Thank you
much.
so much.